The Jacksonville Jaguars. Even as a Texans fan, being that I was very happy to see that the Jacksonville Jaguars were one of the worst teams in the NFL again last year, it does kind of suck to see that this is a team after 2022 when they were a playoff team and halfway through 2023 when they had an incredible start. They now are at the point where they basically have had to revamp their coaching staff again and build not a completely new team around Trevor Lawrence, but pretty much act like they're building from the ground up again. In 2025, we're also going to see year two of Brian Thomas Jr., who had probably the best rookie season of any wide receiver last season. And we're also going to get the first year of the Travis Hunter experience. And we're going to kind of figure out with Trevor Lawrence whether or not this is going to be it for him, meaning, is this going to be the year where he actually steps up and becomes one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? Starting with the year that Brian Thomas Jr. had in 2024, over 80 receptions, over 1,200 yards, and 10 touchdowns. There's only a few guys in Jacksonville Jaguars history who have had seasons comparable to Brian Thomas Jr. Jimmy Smith and Keenan McCardell each did it a lot back in the early 2000s and late 90s. But other than that, for 1,000-yard seasons, you really only are looking at 5 guys. And with guys that have had 10 or more touchdowns as a Jacksonville Jaguar, there are only 4 other guys in the history of the Jaguars to do that in a single season. And so obviously, even though the Jaguars draft Travis Hunter, who's going to be a solid option for them on the offensive side of the ball, and they do have other players such as Travis Etienne, and they have Tank Bigsby as well in the backfield, Brian Thomas Jr. easily becomes the number one option, especially after Christian Kirk gets traded away to the Houston Texans. This is basically going to be the Brian Thomas Jr. show for Jacksonville. We saw Trayvon Walker as well on the defensive side of the ball be one of the main stars, and not really stars, but one of the main players who actually made a positive impact on this side of the ball. Defensively, they were pretty poor against the pass. They were pretty poor against the run. But like I said, Trayvon Walker, his second straight season, getting 10 sacks. Josh Allen had probably a down year by his standards. 8 sacks for him. He now is kind of getting in that territory of guys where he's paid a lot of money, but we don't see him put up the type of statistics that you see a guy with that much money. But again, the hope is that with Trayvon Walker, with Josh Allen, and with everything else that is coming to this team through free agency and through the draft, that defensively, overall, this team just gets better than they were last year. Probably the biggest change of the offseason for the Jacksonville Jaguars was bringing in Liam Cohen to be the head coach of this team and basically be the de facto offensive coordinator as well. And with that, usually with a head coaching change or any change in the coaching staff or front office, you're going to see a lot of moves made on the depth chart and with the roster as a whole. We saw it to begin the offseason with Christian Kirk getting traded to the Houston Texans for a 6th-round pick. You also saw guys like Evan Ingram and Andre Sisco sign away to different teams. And with free agency this year, the Jacksonville Jaguars made a major emphasis on adding in front of Trevor Lawrence. They added Patrick McCarry, Robert Hainsey, and Chuma Edoga to either be starters on this offensive line or be depth pieces. You also get guys in the secondary that are, again, you just want more impact plays made from those guys in the secondary. Jordan Lewis and Eric Murray both come over as pretty high value free agent signings for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars really made their major selection of the draft in the first round. They traded up to get Travis Hunter, making that trade with the Cleveland Browns, sending out some draft capital to Cleveland in order to get Travis Hunter. The hope, obviously, is that he is able to replicate his ability to play both sides of the ball like he was at Colorado. Whether or not he's able to do it at the same successful level is, pretty doubtful. But if he can be a good player on offense and a solid contributor on defense, that makes him one of the most valuable players in the NFL day one. They also get some guys like Caleb Ransall, They get Bashal Tutin. They get Jack Kaiser as guys that are, again, these are third, fourth round picks who, Kaiser comes into a pretty loaded linebacker room, but Tutin and Ransaw, these are guys coming in that could possibly be day one contributors. Ransaw, possibly a day one starter at that safety position. The offense this year is going to look a lot different than it did day one last year. Last year, I think there was a lot of emphasis on the fact that we're going to have Travis Etienne, we're going to have Christian Kirk, and we're going to have an offense that's going to be ran, obviously, by Trevor Lawrence. But now, in my opinion, this seems like an offense that's going to have guys like Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter be the obvious focal points, with guys like Travis Etienne, Brenton Strange, Tank Bigsby be contributing pieces. There's new names like De'Ami Brown, Patrick McCarry, and Robert Hainsey that slot in as starters already. And the offensive line, while it's not one of the better ones in the NFL, they look like a group that can be at least average. And they look like a group that, probably their biggest problem last year was being able to protect Trevor Lawrence and open up holes in the running game. This looks like a group that could do both of those things better in 2025. Defensively is where I don't have as much optimism that they're going to be very good on this side of the ball. You still have some really young players that you're hoping not are due for a breakout, but are just due to contribute a little bit more and hopefully make this side of the ball more effective. You have a lot of names like Devin Lloyd, Darnell Savage. You bring in Jordan Lewis and Eric Murray. And then obviously Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker up front for this team are who you're going to be relying on the most to make an impact. But again, these are all guys that we haven't really seen make a great impact before with this roster. So I don't see a lot really changing in terms of this just not being a great group. Obviously, Travis Hunter comes in, and he is, if just a rotational cornerback and a guy who can make some splash plays every game or so. That's incredible value from him. But there's other guys where I just don't see the value of them being highly relied upon. And there's too many of those guys on this team where I just don't think add that much value to this defense and don't make them better than what they were last year. Schedule-wise, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars got dealt a pretty good hand in terms of not facing too many teams that are much more talented than them. The first 7 weeks, you have only 2 games on the road, and those are probably your 2 toughest games, both at Cincinnati and at San Francisco, that you have in those first 7 weeks. But you do have some games like your London game, which is your every year you can count that the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to London. They go there week 7 against the Rams. But after the bye, it gets pretty difficult just from the sense of they have a majority of their games on the road. 6 of their 10 games are on the road, and basically all of them are back-to-back games on the road. You go to Vegas and Houston, and then 2 weeks later you go to Arizona and Tennessee. 3 weeks later you go to Denver and Indianapolis. But still not a lot of games on this schedule where you look at it and say the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be outmatched. Even the games against Houston, I think Houston's always due for one game where they're just going to let up a stinker against Jacksonville, and they're going to get upset. And so with that, I think a floor for this team, they're not much better than they were last year. But last year, I think everything went wrong that could have gone wrong. And I think the fact that they brought in Liam Cohen, that's a much better head coach than what they had there previously the last few years. And with what he was able to do with Baker Mayfield, if he can have some of the same success with Trevor Lawrence, this team is going to be much better. So floor-wise, 6 or 7 wins is easily what this team is capable of. Ceiling-wise, again, if Liam Cohen is able to replicate the same success with Trevor Lawrence that he had with Baker Mayfield, I think we all agree Trevor Lawrence, from a pure intangible and talent standpoint, is head and shoulders above Baker Mayfield, both figuratively and literally. And now with Travis Hunter in the mix, now with a pure number 1 receiver in Brian Thomas Jr., with a upgraded offensive line and hopefully with two guys on the defensive line and Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, this team has somewhat of a formula to be close to a playoff team. I think 9 wins is probably their ceiling. I don't think they should be anywhere close to 12 or 13 wins. This team is maybe going to be fighting for a wild card spot. And especially with those games late in the season where they have Denver, Indianapolis, and Tennessee, their season, whether or not they make the playoffs and make that wild card spot, is going to kind of come down to those last few games of the year. So again, 9 wins is probably a good ceiling for this team. Again, not something super crazy, but not something where we're looking at them at the end of the year saying, why were they the worst team in their division again?